Hi there, folks. Saber4 here, back with the start of the Legends of the Force Defeat the Meta deck series. I did a similar series to this back in the Jump to Lightspeed set. Um, what this will be is it will be a discussion of a deck, sometimes two, that are major players in the meta at the time, and it'll talk pretty extensively about how that deck operates, what it is trying to do. We'll look at a common build of it, and then we'll go into how to play against it. Because a lot of these decks, you are going to see as big players throughout the current Legends of the Force meta. You're not going to get a giant major shift where they're not going to be popular and powerful. And so this is Boba 4. We'll get a little bit of deck tech on Boba 4. We'll talk about the leader. We'll talk about the philosophy of that deck, some of the play lines, variations and stress points, which matchups are worst and why. And then we'll talk about beating Boba 4 with several of the decks that are major players in the meta right now, which include Han 2, Anakin 3, Cad Bane, Quinlan Voss, Iden and Sabine. Before we get going, if you have not done so already, please like the video, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps out a ton with growth. Let's go ahead and dive on in. All right. This is a familiar face. This is Boba Fett, any methods necessary. We are playing with a leader here from Jump to Lightspeed, but as of this last week, this guy trails Quinlan in major PQ wins by only one. Won a couple this week, caught up to Quinlan. I think Quinlan is at 8. Boba Fett is at 7 as of the screen that I looked at prior to the video. This is an aggression villainy leader, and the primary mechanic on him is indirect damage. The secondary mechanic obviously is piloting. As an action on his leader side, when you deal non-combat damage, you may exhaust this leader to deal 1 indirect damage to a player. Now, in match play, this means your opponent. We're not going to worry so much about twin suns or otherwise right now, but as long as you are dealing any kind of non-combat damage, this is a force multiplier. This is something that allows you to continue to add to that and force your opponent to kind of make some stressful choices. His epic action comes on 6. If you deploy him to the ground, he is a 4/7 vanilla unit. He just adds the traits Underworld, Bounty Hunter, and then Pilot, none of which are terribly relevant unless you are playing yellow, which, hey, guess what? This is Data Vault. We are not. 4/4 Pilot. The attached unit is a leader unit, and so anything that targeted non-leader units no longer targets that. And you get to deal 4 damage divided as you choose. The last thing that happens here is action compression. Notice that Boba is a 4 attack, whether he is a pilot or on the ground. And so what action compression means, and we'll talk about in another slide, is that no matter where he goes, if he's on a ship, if he's on a vehicle, that allows you to do all of the damage that you would have done for both the vehicle and Boba Fett in one action. And so that really lets him kind of start to dictate the pace of the game, as well as making a giant unit because it went +4/+4. The philosophy behind Boba: indirect damage, large health pool. Those are 2 big things that are going to kind of create tension in the game and force your opponent to make choices. This has a decent early game presence, moving into a strong mid game with a solid set of closers, but usually the mid game is where it closes out. Has a very large mid game space presence, and that is there to accommodate a pilot leader flip onto a vehicle, usually in a rather uncontested arena, with that mini barrage and clearing out a bunch of units that have soaked indirect damage. When you are playing against Boba, or when Boba is sitting down with this deck, a part of that philosophy is that he realizes, and that you should realize as his opponent, that your health pool is whatever is on your base plus whatever is on your units as far as indirect damage goes, because you are allowed to assign it. Now, the trick is you are allowed to assign it, but it is not preventable damage. So a unit that has a shield cannot take 4 indirect damage and pop the shield and ignore it all. You have to account for every point of indirect damage. As all damage in the game goes, this is counted individually, but this is done simultaneously. And so what we're looking at here is that it might happen in sequence, because you might get an indirect damage done and then Boba's ability triggers another instance of it. That can be important with things like Shadowcaster, though Shadowcaster is not in the primary versions of this deck. Either way, this mid-game space presence accommodates that mini barrage. That mini barrage is there to clear the board in a lot of cases of units that have soaked up a bunch of indirect damage. And then the win conditions of this are that indirect bleed, which forces tension between keeping units alive or putting damage on Boba's base, which makes a much easier race for him to win, followed by that action compressed damage surge late. So when Boba goes on a ship, that means that the ships are a minimum 7 attack from what's in here, unless you're on a TIE bomber, but then it still does 3 indirect. But that piloted ship does Boba's full damage in a single action, and then the surge cards like Planetary Bombardment are allowed to do quite a lot of indirect damage at once. Playlines. The opening play for Boba depends on which flavor of Boba you're playing. I'm going to show you the kind that I've been using, which is also similar to the kind that won the largest PQ that Boba has won to date. But any of these run a very wide array. Because they're playing Data Vault, they're going to have about 16 of them instead of 13 in order to kind of guarantee that turn 1 play. They want a very wide array of turn 1 plays, and they can either effectively dodge and kind of lane dodge and get themselves in a situation where they're able to avoid and continue to push damage in a lane that's their own, or they can lane challenge if they need to. And they also have some ones in there which can either ignore Quinlan's ping or can work in other ways that we will discuss when we look at the deck. The win defeated effects are on several of these cards that are early on, and that allows them to continue to push some of this indirect damage even if you defeat the unit that is there. Turns 2 and 3 are really setting the stage. This deck will ramp if it's able to do so safely, because that means that the Boba Flip is able to come online on game resource turn 5. That might be different from actual game turn 4, but on the game resource turn number 5, which is where a lot of other leaders flip, for example, Mother Talzin and Quinlan Voss. And so that puts Boba's flip on the same timetable. And if he's able to do so safely, Boba usually will like to ramp on turn 2. Otherwise, building a space presence. And, you've got enough things in here on 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 to be able to build a quite monumental space presence, and something that is dealing indirect damage and is causing a lot of headaches if your opponent is unable to challenge it. The 5 resource turn is really priming for the flip. You are looking to reinforce or put something in the space arena uncontested if you can, and or clear the field. Something like a Dorian gunship is a huge play for them on 5, because that not only represents a capital ship, but if you have played resource turns 3 and 4 into the space arena, it's going to deal 3 indirect damage, a 4th with Boba, and represent a very strong threat out here to be as big as an 8-10 with Boba flipped onto it. A ready unit that could become an 8-10 with Boba flipped onto it, that has dealt a sizable chunk of indirect damage the previous turn and can allow you to really kind of clear the field out for a very clean flip turn. The flip turn starts the surge. So if you've put Dorian gunship down, you've got Planetary Bombardment that's online, or otherwise you can start into other units like the Ruthless Raider and start to really chain into your end game. Whatever you have Boba on, if he is on a vehicle, especially a readied vehicle, you're talking about something that is a minimum power of 4. Because yes, you could theoretically put him onto a TIE bomber, but the floor of what Boba is on is going to be very high. The ceiling of it is going to be 8 power or so, but that's still a massive, massive hit, especially when he can line up the barrage before it. And if he's able to flip onto something cleanly with resources, he can do that and then follow that with planetary bombardment, or follow that or precede it with it, or follow it with a second overwhelming barrage, and a barrage for 10, which is difficult to challenge. The end game for him comes in the form of things like Maul, Palpatine, and Devastator, all of which both continue either overwhelming in the case of Maul, or dealing some of this non-combat damage in the case of Palpatine or Devastator, and really stretching Boba's reach into the late game. Variations. The one that I'm going to talk about is on the next slide. It is, as we said, it's the winner of the largest PQ that Boba has won to date. I run something very similar, and so I used that particular list, and I will credit it with that in the next slide. It layers non-combat damage to trigger Boba's ability, and really kind of creates early stress points by saying that, you're going to have to keep on putting indirect damage somewhere. There is a droid variant, which is one about a 70-person PQ, if I remember the numbers correctly. That one uses some early game droid units and droid ships, and then adds value through the invisible hand. It's more crowded at the 6 resource spot as a result, because you still have Ruthless Raider in that spot. But you put a lot of 2 and 3 cost. You've put a lot of 2 cost units into a deck that is running Data Vault, and as a result, you can churn through some of those extra cards that Data Vault gave you and get a lot of value out of Invisible Hand, because it deploys more units. And it also means that some of those units are able to strip off upgrades, do some other things like that in a search for it sense, which is quite a powerful effect. And then there's the Raider version, and the Raider version looks for things like Vader to be pilots and kind of stack some of your big early game units. If you can grab one of these Raiders that's a raid 3 and stick Vader on it, now Vader is it's attacking for 6. Vader pings a thing. If that thing dies, it pings again. We add the indirect damage off of Boba because you did non-combat damage. It's a mess. The robot vacuum's about to shout at us, so give me just a second here. No, not going to empty out. You going to do it? There it is. "20 seconds of free air." There we go. So stress points. Keeping early game units alive is not necessarily a stress point for the Boba deck. Those are lightning rods. Those are something that you are meant to need to attack. Because if he is allowed to continue to attack with early game units that pile on indirect damage and attack the base for even chip damage, you're going to be way behind. So it's meant for you to have to deal with those units. That kind of binds you into lower health units that then can't soak as much. So that's one of the big stress points there. And he's okay with losing those things if that means that it sets up the 5 and 6 resource turns better for him. That Boba flip is a stress point. There are a lot of acceptable targets, but forcing the Boba player to use resources prior to the flip, especially if he has to deploy a target to then flip onto, means that he can't attack that turn with that unit, and is just a much, much safer way to play against Boba if you can manage it. On Boba's side, he's trying to make sure that he's able to flip with resources open. So let's take a look at the most successful winner so far to date. User Maddie Kinnebox won the largest PQ with Boba. And a thing that you want to take a look at here, this top row are all of your turn one plays. There are 14 of them. I run a little heavier. I run at about 16 of them. But what they've done here is that they have put in salvage, which allows you to buy back a vehicle for the cost of 1 damage. Salvage is a 0 cost to play, but that also means that it's a 0 if you force throw, which is a great piece of protection because instead of having to pitch one of your later game units, it can sit there on 4 or 5, deploy out a unit that your opponent tries to thin target. They choose to force throw the Boba player. The Boba player dumps salvage. Your opponent used a resource. Yes, got a card out of your hand, but at the same time did no damage, and it's your turn to act. So has a lot of high utility in way more than just one circumstance. Similarly, the First Order Stormtrooper, you can deal 1 damage to one of my things. I'm fine with that. Provides a little bit of protection from Quinlan. The Kylo's TIE Silencer also provides some protection because if you discard it, yes, you're going to get to deal 2 damage to something, but then I get to come back and play Kylo's TIE Silencer out of my discard. So there's a lot of good thought has gone into this early chain of units. The 3-cost units, the one thing that I kind of might change in here would be the Prototype TIE Advanced. I think I like Von Regs a little better, even though the attack is not quite as strong. Being able to add a pilot to it, especially Boba, makes it very, very challenging to deal with. You do have both resupply and super laser tech in here, but also at this point you have open fire, which can deal with a turn 1 play and do indirect damage on top of it. This moves into the 4 resource play, and so you have Fett's Fire Spray, which is a wonderful target for Boba's deployment, as well as dealing 2 indirect damage when it comes out because Boba is on the table. IG-2000, spreading damage, go ahead and activating your indirect. The shuttle is a shielded unit and another powerful play because you can steal other shields or other upgrades that can move to eligible targets. Dorian Gunship we've talked about, very strong play, especially if you have a unit or 2 in space already. Overwhelming Barrage, quite an obvious play, although one of the things that I mentioned in previous discussions of meta is that playing Overwhelming Barrage, the games that it hits the table have a win rate below 50%. One of the few things that you wouldn't expect. Also in there as another removal aspect is Craving Power, which again dealt non-combat damage, allowed Boba's ability. Vader is here more as a pilot than as a ground unit, but he is a very powerful play at 6. Being able to drop out a 7/7 on the ground and then put Boba somewhere else, is a high tension point for your opponents. Ruthless Raider is Ruthless Raider. It's the same thing that we've known since set 1. Very, very powerful card. Very useful here. Planetary Bombardment, high stress point because you do have a lot of easy targets for it to be a 12 rather than an 8. And I will gladly pay 6 resources to deal 12 indirect damage, especially if something like Devastator hits the table. Maul, Devastator, and Emperor Palpatine. You will notice that in the sideboard there is protection from the Kylo Ren deck in the form of Agreed Parliamentarian, as well as an additional Palpatine and a couple of Crate Dragons. The Palpatine's Return is there in case you're dealing with control. So that's the biggest PQ winner so far. Let's talk about what challenges it the worst, what this struggles against the worst. That is Han 2. The reason why Hantu, especially the blue variant, is so challenging for this deck is that this has a lot of built-in access to restore. I mean, Yaddle was a great addition to Hantu just outright, and the 2 turn 1 Jedi that you have the ability to play in Hantu blue really stress this deck because Yaddle is able to cut off. Yaddle's able to restore, and Adigalia is able to start chipping back if they play events. But if Yaddle sticks around, take damage to the base, Han doesn't care. He's going to restore it. He's going to attack with a Jedi and then another Jedi and then follow that with just chains of restore down the road. And Boba can't quite keep up. They are able to soak up a lot of damage with the Surge because Han's flip. Han Solo in that deck is a unit that I would, yes, I want to get him out there. I want to get his 3 attack, but then I'd like for him to go back to the leader spot because I'm usually not going to use his ability multiple times in a turn, and it's safer for him to go ahead and go back. So he's able to take 6 of that 8 or 6 of that 12, and I'm not concerned with that. And that's talking off of planetary bombardment. While the green lacks restore, it can very quickly become overwhelming on the ground. Turn 1 Adigalia, especially a Han leader ability, turn 1 Adigalia force throw, or turn 1 Gunji force throw, are able to really stunt the growth of Boba's deck because you usually don't have a lot of protection for that at that point. Access to ambush through Blue Leader and Eager Escort can slow down tremendously Boba's ability to continue to compete in space in the early game, and doing so puts it in a position where it's just not as effective on its flip turn. Ramping is not terribly safe against this deck because Han is going to pour out units, and in doing so, if you take turn 3 off to ramp, you're going to wind up very, very behind on the board. You do have some protection from upgrades in Boba's deck, but a swing with General's Blade can create an absolute runaway game. Gunji, General's Blade, okay, yeah, if that's turn 1 and turn 2, then turn 3, Han can cheat in a 7-7. Yes, he'll bring him in as a 7-5, but you can go ahead and kiss that game goodbye because what's going to wind up happening is that you're going to get Keller and Beck. Keller and Beck's going to bring a friend, and you've got 2 monster units on the board with a 5/8 Gunji and a 7/5 Keller and Beck, and whatever Keller and brought with him. So that game very quickly gets out of hand for Boba. Anakin Skywalker, similarly, the meta version of him is almost exclusively blue. It's going to have a lot of the same force cards in it. It's going to have the same access to things like Yaddle and Yoda, which not only have built-in restore, but that expand the built-in restore. Usually Han would cheat in units. Anakin would use slightly lower power units and deal a little bit of damage to his base in order to clear out bigger units with his ability. He's not a powerful presence in space at all in many cases, but he kind of is able to ignore what you're building there because he's got enough restore on the ground, and you don't have a great way. If you don't have a great way to get rid of the Anakin unit when it flips, damage to the base just multiplies his power, and you can wind up in a race that Boba can't win. The MVP card for both Anakin and Hantu Blue is going to be something like the Itinerant Warrior, which can soak up some of that damage and then still have the shield, and so can't be really barraged and dealt with. So a lot of play there for Han and Anakin out of a shielded unit that is just hard for Boba to escape that value. Cad Bane and Quinlan. These two are about 50% match wins with Boba. So these are very even splits. The way to beat Boba with Quinlan This is aided by Depa Bilba. That's now a big swing on the ground and something that you can come out and play Depa, take out something with ambush if needed. You have more access to ambush through Plo Koon and through some of your other unit plays that are out here in yellow. You have Exhaust that's out there and available with Ahsoka Tano, and you have the ability to do things with Kira, like to make planetary bombardment very difficult to play, just by naming it, even if it's not in their hand. Planetary bombardment for 9 is problematic. So that lessens the surge. You also have the ability to use Force Throw to clear out some of Boba's space units. Quinlan is not going to be able to challenge Boba as directly in space, but he's still got Tarkin Town and judicious use of that. And so even with that 8-point gap, this is a 50-50 game. Cad Bane, as long as he is managing damage in the early game well, Cad Bane has a couple of things that, again, are very challenging for Boba to deal with. Pings, McClunky, trades, the Jabba unit itself is incredibly powerful in this because the Jabba unit just has such a big health pool that it can soak up a ton of indirect damage and not be defeated. If it's searched for McClunky, it can soak up a ton of damage and then pick it back up, for 0 because it cost 1 less to play. And play him back out the next turn, search for another McClunky. Put a huge body that just absorbs big chunks of indirect damage out there. The CAD unit can scoop up a lot of Boba's overflow. Obviously, it can't scoop up a leader unit, but you have access to things like Bazine to strip options near the flip. And so there's a lot of different ways that Cad Bane can kind of use his tricks back and forth to very much compete with Boba. That said, he's got a health pool that's 8 points smaller. And so Cad Bane can also be, like Quinlan, can be overrun very quickly. These are both the ping leaders, equally fair matchups. Using your board well, an evenly skilled player into each is just going to depend on the draw more than anything else. Beating Boba, Iden Versio. Early game decisions matter. This is going to go for basically any control. Iden happens to be probably one of the better ones at it, just because she can continue to use her ability through the early game and heal. Yes, Krennic could come out a turn earlier and gives you the same combination. And Krennic has the built-in restore, but he's 1 unit. And if that 1 unit is defeated, the restore from Krennic also goes away. That's a powerful thing, but they're very different decks because Krennic is not likely to be playing as card-based control as Iden. Iden is very likely to be playing event-based control versus Krennic playing unit-based. But Boba might struggle with Krennic from time to time because, hey, damage my unit. It's powerful now. Anyway, in Iden, your early resource decisions matter. You're okay with putting down some, but not all, of your late game power into your early resources in order to draw into and use your event-based control. Don't cut up the late game completely, but be patient. Blue-green has better end game than what Boba has, even with the surge. Your leader can extend the life of this game, and your big units at the end just take the game over. The biggest key and the biggest takeaway here is to stay out of range of planetary barrage, which we know with no units on the board is 9, considering Boba's leader ability. Sabine. This is one of the meta decks with about the hardest matchup into Boba, and that is just because Sabine has a very well-known go-wide strategy that does not have a ton of health on her units to be able to soak stuff up. She is looking to get into a race, and if the race has Boba in it, Boba is able to continue pinging indirect damage and forcing Sabine into tough choices. Yes, he flips 2 turns later on a natural curve, but by that point, it's usually a little bit more board stable for Boba than it is for Sabine, especially because Boba is going to have cleared out his ground units. Quite often, Sabine's biggest and strongest play is that ECL of Wrecker. That is something that Boba can almost entirely dodge just by ramming his ground units into things and getting rid of them at the right time. Probably the best case start for Sabine is to play anything green into Sabine's masterpiece and start, the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing into Sabine's masterpiece. If the Phoenix Squadron A-Wing is allowed to stick, then you're going to keep adding experience tokens on with masterpiece. You can even do that by ECLing this in and taking out something that does not have 3 power, or even taking out something that has 3 power and adding your experience token first. This will allow you to continue to attack and keep initiative in a way that you continue to attack with Sabine's masterpiece and continue to grow a unit. Piloting that further with Chewbacca or Luke allows that to really grow that unit quickly and make it a board situation where you are able to control the narrative in space. The other option is to continue to go wide on the ground, but leave yourself room. You can hold Boba's flip hostage with Poe. Playing him out on curve makes it where, yes, Boba is able to barrage and get rid of something, but as long as Poe does not have damage onto him, that barrage could eliminate him. It's a leader flip, and that means I discard a card and it goes away. So there's a lot of good play line back into what Boba is able to do, even if you're not able to get out and challenge that space arena. That said, if the cards line up so that you can go Phoenix Squadron on turn 1 into a Sabine's masterpiece on turn 2, even if you have to ECL it, grow Sabine's masterpiece, put Chewbacca on it. Now you've got a 7-4 that's left behind in space. Boba doesn't have anything that can deal with that directly terribly well besides open fire. And as long as you force them to use any kind of resources, or you take advantage of initiative and go ahead and put things out there to continue to grow that unit, he's going to have to devote a lot of resources, effort, and energy into dealing with just Sabine's masterpiece, while you are able to continue to race and put Sabine on the ground, because that's the 4 resource turn that you're doing that, and now you're kind of off and running. It's a hard matchup, probably the worst of this set, but it is a winnable matchup. So there we are. This is part 1. We'll come back with others as we look at the meta and kind of things develop. We'll see you next time.